struggling musician. Those words had almost become his identity. He carried his guitar everywhere, not because it made him look like an artist, but because it was all he truly had. The wooden case was scratched from years of traveling, playing on sidewalks, in subway corners, and at small bars where no one really listened. He didn't mind the scratches. In fact, he thought they made the guitar more alive, like scars that told a story. Most mornings he woke up in his small rented room with peeling paint on the walls and a ceiling that leaked during heavy rain. The room wasn't much, but it was the cheapest place he could find, and it gave him a space to sleep and write music. He would sit by the window, guitar on his lap, strumming soft notes that only he heard. These notes often carried more comfort than words because he believed music understood him better than people did. Money was always short. Some nights, after performing at a noisy bar where half the crowd cared more about their drinks than the songs, he would count his earnings. A few wrinkled bills, some loose change, barely enough for rent or food. He didn't complain, though. He told himself that the day he gave up playing, the day he decided music wasn't worth the struggle, that would be the day he truly became poor. As long as he played, even if he didn't have much in his pocket, he felt rich in spirit. Still, it was hard. Hard to smile when the landlord knocked on his door for rent. Hard to explain to family back home why he hadn't made it yet. They wanted him to get a normal job, something stable. But stability didn't feel like living to him. He wanted music, even if it meant walking a lonely road. One gray afternoon, after finishing a long shift of playing in the subway where people hurried past without looking, he decided to wander the streets instead of heading home. He needed strings for his guitar because the last set had been stretched thin. Usually he ordered cheap ones online, but today he wanted to see if any small stores nearby had something affordable. He wandered down a side street he rarely walked on, and that's when he noticed it. The store looked old, almost forgotten. The wooden sign above the door was faded, and the glass windows were dusty with instruments inside that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. He stopped, pressing his hand on the cold glass, staring at a row of guitars lined against the wall. Some were polished, some worn, but all of them seemed like they were waiting for someone. He pushed the door open and a small bell rang. The air inside was thick with the smell of wood and old paper. Rows of violins, trumpets, drums, and guitars filled the shop, but there were no customers. Behind the counter, an older man stood, his white hair tucked under a cap. His shoulders were a little bent, and his eyes looked tired, as if he had been waiting in silence for too long. "Afternoon," the musician said, his voice low. The man looked up slowly. "Afternoon. Haven't seen you before. Looking for something specific?" "Strings," he answered. "Cheap ones if you've got any." The man chuckled, though it wasn't really a laugh of joy. It was the kind of laugh people let out when they're trying to hide how bad things are. He shuffled to the side and pulled out a small box. "Got a few left. Not many folks ask for guitar strings these days. Everyone just buys online." The musician nodded, picking up the packet. As he did, he let his eyes wander. The place was filled with instruments that carried history. Yet it felt lifeless, like a stage without an audience. "This is a nice store," he said softly. The old man sighed. "Used to be. This shop was alive once. Kids would come in after school. Bands would rent instruments. Families bought their first guitars here. Now, days pass with no one walking in." His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to keep it steady. "I don't know how much longer I can keep the doors open." The musician felt a pang in his chest. He understood what it meant to love something so much yet watch it slip away. In the man's voice, he heard the same loneliness he carried in his songs. "How long have you been running this place?" the musician asked. "Over 40 years, the man replied, his eyes drifting across the room. "Started when I was young, full of dreams. I thought music would always keep people together. But times change. People stream songs on their phones now. They don't care about instruments or learning to play. They just press a button and listen." He paused, shaking his head. "Feels like the world doesn't have space for people like me anymore." The words hit deep. The musician didn't know why, but he didn't want to leave. He leaned his guitar case against the counter and asked, "Mind if I play a little?" "Just to test the strings." The man gave a small shrug. "Go ahead. Might be nice to hear some music in here again." The musician opened his case, carefully fitting the new strings onto his guitar. Once they were tight, he strummed softly, letting the sound fill the empty room. It wasn't a loud performance. It wasn't meant to impress. It was just a simple melody, one he had written on a lonely night when he couldn't sleep. The notes floated through the dusty air, bouncing off the walls, reaching into corners where silence had lived too long. The old man closed his eyes, listening. His shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since the musician walked in, his face softened. When the last note faded, the man whispered, That was beautiful. Reminds me why I started this place in the first place." The musician smiled faintly. "Music doesn't die. Sometimes it just gets buried under noise." They stood in silence for a while. The store, once quiet and heavy, now felt warmer, like the melody had lit a small flame inside. The man finally spoke again. "What's your name?" The musician told him. "Well," the man said, adjusting his cap, "you've got something special. Shame the world doesn't hear more of it." The musician slipped the packet of strings into his pocket, pulling out the little money he had. "I don't know if I can afford these. Things are tight right now." The man waved his hand. "Keep your money. Just promise me you'll keep playing. If people like you stop, then music really will die." The kindness in those words nearly broke him. He nodded, gripping the strings tightly as if they were more valuable than gold. He didn't know it yet, but this meeting wasn't just about strings or a lonely store. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. When he stepped back outside, the sky had turned a pale shade of blue and the evening air carried a chill. He slung the guitar over his shoulder and glanced back at the shop. Through the dusty glass, he saw the old man behind the counter, sitting quietly, as if replaying the melody in his head, walking away. The musician couldn't shake the feeling that this store was more than just a place to buy instruments. It was like a mirror of his own life, forgotten, overlooked, but still holding a fire waiting to be seen. He didn't know why yet, but he felt drawn to it, as if his path and the store's path were somehow tied together. That night, as he sat in his tiny room again, guitar in hand, he thought about the man's words. "Just promise me you'll keep playing." He strummed slowly, letting the sound fill the cracks in the ceiling, and whispered to himself, "I will." He had no idea that soon, keeping that promise would not only save him, but also the man who owned that dying music store. The next few days, the musician couldn't get that small music store out of his mind. He kept replaying the look on the old man's face when he strummed those notes, the way the store seemed to come alive for a few minutes. It wasn't just about buying strings anymore. Something inside him felt pulled back toward that place, as if he had left a part of himself behind in that dusty room. One evening, after finishing a tiring set in a crowded bar where most people were too busy drinking to notice him, he counted his tips. The money wasn't much, but enough for a simple dinner. Instead of heading straight home, he found himself walking toward that side street again. The lights in the store window glowed faintly, a soft orange that looked inviting against the dark street. When he pushed the door open, the bell above rang again. This time the old man looked up with surprise. "You're back," he said, almost as if he hadn't expected anyone to return. The musician shrugged. "Thought I'd check in. Maybe play a little if that's all right." The man gave a small smile and waved toward the stools near the counter. "Be my guest. Place hasn't heard music in weeks until you showed up." The musician sat down, took out his guitar and began to play softly. A slow tune at first, then something brighter. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls that were lined with instruments collecting dust. The old man leaned against the counter, his eyes half closed, letting the notes carry him somewhere else. After a while, the musician set his guitar down. "Why don't people come here anymore?" he asked quietly. The old man sighed, his shoulders sinking. "The world's changed. Used to be kids saved up their allowance to buy their first guitar here. Parents brought their children for lessons. Bands would gather to rent equipment. This place was once a heartbeat in the community. But then the big stores opened. Prices dropped online. Everyone chases convenience now. Nobody wants to walk into a little shop like this anymore." He paused, rubbing his hands together. "I tried holding on. I told myself things would turn around. But truth is, I'm months behind on bills. Some days I wonder why I even unlock the door in the morning. The only sound I hear is this bell when I open the shop, and most days it doesn't ring again until I lock up." The musician listened, his chest tightening. He saw in the man the same loneliness he carried inside himself. He thought about his own struggles, about nights when he played songs to a crowd that didn't care. He knew what it felt like to pour your heart into something and watch it be ignored. "Have you ever thought about trying something different?" he asked. The old man chuckled bitterly. Different at my age? I wouldn't even know where to begin. There was silence for a moment. The musician glanced around, his eyes stopping at the corner where a small platform stood, almost like a stage, though it hadn't been used in years. What if you let people play here? He suggested. Not just to buy instruments. What if this place became a spot for music again? The man looked up, puzzled. You mean performances? Yeah, the musician said, warming to the idea. Open mic nights. Jam sessions. People could come in, share their music, meet others. It wouldn't just be a store anymore. It'd be a gathering place. The old man frowned, as if unsure. That sounds ambitious. But who would come? People don't even step inside now. The musician leaned forward, his voice steady. Maybe they just need a reason. Music is still alive. People still crave it, even if they hide behind their phones. They just need a place where it feels real. The man studied him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. You've got more hope than I do. The musician smiled faintly. Maybe that's because I've got nothing to lose. That night, they locked up the store together. The old man turned the key, staring at the sign above the door as if it were the last time he might see it. But deep down, a tiny spark of curiosity flickered in him. Could the young musician be right? The next week, the musician returned again. This time he brought a friend he knew from the subway, a young drummer who carried sticks in his backpack. Together, they played for nearly an hour inside the store. Their music echoed through the walls, spilling out into the quiet street. A few passers-by stopped to listen through the window, their faces curious. One even stepped inside, pretending to browse, but really just drawn to the sound. The old man noticed. His tired eyes lit up as he realized the music was pulling people in, even if only for a moment. After they finished, he said, "Maybe you're onto something." Word began to spread slowly. The musician told others he knew, singers, guitarists, young kids learning their first chords. Soon, once or twice a week, a small crowd gathered in the shop. They brought their instruments, shared their songs, and clapped for each other. The dusty shelves no longer felt forgotten. The air carried laughter and applause. The old man still worried. He reminded the musician that the bills were piling up, that this sudden spark might not be enough. But he also admitted something he hadn't said in years. For the first time in a long while, this place feels alive again. The musician grinned. That's a start. One evening, the shop was busier than usual. A teenager performed a shaky but heartfelt song on the guitar, her parents standing proudly in the back. Another man played the saxophone, filling the room with deep, soulful notes. When the musician took his turn, he sang one of his own songs and the crowd listened closely. For once, people weren't ignoring him like in the subway or the bar. They were really listening. The old man stood behind the counter, watching the scene with watery eyes. He remembered the early days of his store, when young people first discovered the joy of music under his roof. He hadn't thought he would ever see that again. After the crowd left, he turned to the musician and said softly, "You've given this place more in 2 weeks than I managed in years. I don't know how to thank you." The musician shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank the music. It's bigger than both of us." For the first time in years, the old man locked the door at night with a smile instead of despair. The store wasn't saved yet. The bills still loomed. But something had shifted. Hope had returned, carried in on the strings of a guitar and the beating of a drum. Neither of them knew it then. But what had just started as a few songs in an empty room was about to grow into something neither could have imagined. Something that would transform not only the store, but their own lives as well. The store began to change in ways no one expected. At first, it was just the musician and a couple of friends playing songs for each other. But soon, word spread beyond their small circle. People whispered about a forgotten music shop where live sounds filled the air, where strangers gathered not to buy but to feel music the way it used to be. Every week, more faces showed up. A pair of high school boys brought their acoustic guitars and nervously strummed their first chords in front of others. A woman in her 50s, who had once been part of a choir, came to sing a song she had written years ago but never shared. Even children started showing up with small violins and keyboards, encouraged by their parents to try. The old man, who once spent his days sitting behind the counter with nothing but silence around him, now walked slowly through the crowd, greeting people. His tired eyes began to soften. He listened as laughter and applause filled the shop and realized that for the first time in many years, his place was alive again. The musician played almost every time, and though he didn't always sing his best, people listened. Really listened. That was new for him. In bars and subways, he was background noise. Here, in this dusty shop with its flickering lights and crooked shelves, he felt like every note mattered. One evening after everyone had left, he and the old man sat together, sipping tea from paper cups. "You see what you've done here?" the old man asked, his voice gentle but full of pride. The musician smiled. "It's not me. It's the music. People are hungry for something real. They just needed a place." The old man nodded, but his smile faded as he looked around. "Still, this doesn't pay the bills. I owe months of rent. The landlord's been patient, but I can't keep delaying forever." The musician leaned forward. "What if we do more? What if we turn this into something bigger? Classes, workshops, maybe even streaming some of the performances online? People could donate, maybe even buy instruments here again." The old man raised an eyebrow. "Streaming? Online? I don't know anything about that world." "Then let me help," the musician said simply. "I don't have much money, but I can give my time. I can set it up, talk to people, spread the word." The man stared at him, shaking his head in wonder. "Why are you helping me? You could be out chasing your own career instead of worrying about an old shop." The musician hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I see myself in this store. People overlook it, just like they overlook me. But I know there's value here. I don't want to see it disappear." The old man said nothing for a long time, but in his eyes there was gratitude he couldn't put into words. Over the next few weeks, the musician worked tirelessly. He made small flyers with hand-drawn guitars and taped them around the neighborhood. He talked to anyone who would listen, bar owners, buskers, even people in the subway, to come and check out the shop. He borrowed an old camera from a friend and started recording some of the performances. With shaky hands, he learned how to upload them online, giving the store a presence it had never had before. The change was slow, but it was there. A handful of people from outside the neighborhood came to watch. Some donated a little money when they saw the videos. Others wrote messages saying how much they missed seeing real music like that. The old man couldn't believe people from far away were watching his little store, but it wasn't easy. There were nights when only 2 or 3 people showed up. Nights when the landlord came by, reminding the old man that patience wouldn't last forever. There were moments when the musician felt exhausted, wondering if all his efforts were just delaying the inevitable. One evening, after a particularly small turnout, the old man slumped behind the counter. "Maybe it's no use," he murmured. "Maybe it's time to accept this place has had its day." The musician placed his guitar gently on the floor and looked at him firmly. "Don't say that. You've kept this place alive for 40 years. That means something, and it still means something now. People are coming little by little. We can't give up just because it's hard." The old man rubbed his temples, but then he caught sight of a young boy tugging at his father's sleeve, pointing at a drum set in the corner. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder. His father smiled and promised they would come back. The old man's heart softened again. "All right," he whispered. "We'll keep going a little longer." The musician's ideas grew bolder. He suggested holding a weekend open mic, advertised as music for everyone. To their surprise, the store filled beyond capacity. Chairs had to be borrowed from neighbors, and people even sat on the floor. Musicians of all kinds took the small platform. An elderly man played blues on his harmonica. A shy girl read lyrics she had scribbled in her notebook, and a small group of teenagers jammed together for the first time. The old man stood in the corner, tears brimming in his eyes. He couldn't believe this was his store, the same store he had almost closed. That night, as they cleaned up together, he turned to the musician and said, "You've given me back something I thought I lost. Hope." The musician smiled, though deep inside he was just as grateful. For him, too, the shop had become more than a building. It was a stage, a community, a reminder that music still had a place in the world. But success brought new challenges. The sudden increase in people meant more wear on the instruments, more need for repairs, more expenses. The old man worried constantly about how to keep up. The musician tried to reassure him, but he too felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. One late night after everyone had left, the two of them sat again in silence. The old man finally said, "I've been thinking. Maybe I should sell the place before the debt gets worse. Maybe then at least I can leave with dignity." The musician's stomach dropped. He looked around at the instruments, the posters on the wall, the little stage where so many had poured their hearts out. "If you sell it, all of this disappears," he said quietly. "It's not just a store anymore. It's a home for people like me. Don't give up on it yet." The old man sighed deeply. "You talk like it's easy, but this is a burden I've carried alone for years." "Then don't carry it alone anymore," the musician said. "Let me share it with you. Let the people who come here share it too. It doesn't have to be your fight alone." The words hung in the air, heavy but true. For the first time, the old man realized he wasn't fighting for the store by himself anymore. He had someone beside him, someone who believed just as strongly as he once did. The next morning, the musician returned early. He brought paint, brushes, and a bucket of soapy water. The old man blinked in confusion. "What are you doing?" "Giving this place a new face," the musician said with a grin. "If we want people to believe in it, it has to look alive." The two of them spent the whole day cleaning. They wiped dust off the shelves, polished the guitars, washed the windows until sunlight streamed in. The old man even climbed a ladder to repaint the faded sign above the door. For hours, they worked side by side, sweat dripping, laughter echoing, until the store no longer looked forgotten but reborn. When the doors opened that evening, people noticed. They stepped inside and saw not just instruments, but a place that looked cared for, loved. And in their faces, both the old man and the musician saw something they hadn't seen in years: belief. The store wasn't saved yet. There were still debts, still fears. But something stronger than fear was growing between them. A partnership, a bond. And with each passing day, as the sound of music filled the walls, both of them felt their lives changing in ways they had never imagined. The store was no longer silent. On most evenings, laughter, music, and voices spilled out onto the street. People walking by would stop to peek in, curious about the glow of life coming from behind the glass windows that had once looked so dusty and forgotten. Inside, the shelves that had collected years of stillness now held instruments being tried, tuned, and played. The air itself felt different, lighter, as if the walls remembered what it meant to be alive. The old man couldn't help but smile when he unlocked the doors each morning. Where he once expected long days of emptiness, he now prepared for visitors. Some came to browse, others came to listen, and a few even signed up for lessons that the musician had begun to offer. The musician wasn't a trained teacher, but he had patience and he cared. Young kids who once only dreamed of holding a guitar now had someone showing them how to strum their first chord. Their faces lit up at the sound, and those little sparks of joy spread to their parents and filled the shop with hope. For the musician, it was a new chapter too. He still played in bars and subway stations when he needed extra money, but now he had something more meaningful. When he performed in the store, people clapped because they wanted to, not because they were being polite. When he sang his songs, people asked him about the stories behind the lyrics. For the first time, he felt like his music mattered, but with growth came new problems. The little gatherings that started with a handful of people soon grew to crowds that barely fit inside. Chairs had to be borrowed from neighbors, instruments had to be repaired more often, and the small sound equipment the store owned wasn't enough for larger performances. The musician and the old man often stayed late at night, sweeping the floor, putting instruments back in place, and worrying about how they would keep up. Bills still came, and they were heavier than the coins in the donation jar at the counter. The old man kept the letters hidden under a stack of papers. But sometimes, when he thought the musician wasn't looking, he would open one, stare at the numbers, and rub his forehead in silence. One evening, after everyone left, the musician found him sitting alone, staring at an overdue notice. "Bad news again?" the musician asked softly. The old man sighed. "It's like trying to stop water from leaking through holes in a boat. No matter how hard we work, the bills keep piling up. I don't know how much longer I can keep this going. The musician sat across from him. I know it's hard. But look around. People are coming here again. They love this place. It's not just a shop anymore, it's a home for music. That has to count for something. The old man nodded slowly, but his face stayed troubled. Hope doesn't pay rent. The words hung in the air, heavy and true. The musician leaned forward. Then we find another way. What if we host a big event? A fundraiser? A concert night? Something that brings in the community and shows them what this store means. The old man frowned. A fundraiser? You really think people would give money? The musician nodded. Not just money. Support. If they see what's at stake, they'll want to help. We just need to give them a reason. The old man studied him for a long time, then sighed. You've got a fire in you, kid. Maybe I've been carrying this weight so long I forgot what it's like to fight with hope instead of fear. So they began to plan. The musician reached out to everyone he knew. The singers, the drummers, the kids who had learned their first chords in the store. He asked them all to come and perform, to bring their families and friends. The old man, though hesitant, helped too, polishing the instruments, fixing broken chairs, and even painting a small banner that read, "Save Our Music Store, a night of songs and stories." When the night came, the store was overflowing. People filled every corner, sitting on the floor, standing in the aisles, even gathering outside the windows to listen. The air buzzed with excitement, and for the first time the old man looked around and saw not a dying business, but a living community. The performances were simple but powerful. A shy teenager played her first original song, and the crowd clapped so loudly she blushed. A middle-aged man who had given up music years ago dusted off his harmonica and played the blues, earning cheers that made him grin from ear to ear. Parents sang with their children, friends played together, and each song carried not just notes but stories of lives touched by music. When it was the musician's turn, he stood on the small platform with his guitar. He looked at the faces around him, faces that believed, faces that cared. He sang a song he had written on one of his hardest nights, a song about struggle and holding on when the world feels like it's against you. His voice cracked at moments, but the honesty in it filled the room. By the end, people were wiping tears from their eyes. After the last note faded, the crowd erupted in applause. The old man, standing near the back, felt his throat tighten. He had doubted so much, feared so much, but now he saw clearly. This wasn't the end of his store. It was a new beginning. At the end of the night, people dropped money into the donation jar, more than either of them had ever seen. It wasn't enough to solve all the problems, but it was proof that people cared, that the store mattered. Later that evening, when the crowd had gone, the old man turned to the musician. "You were right," he said quietly. "This place isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who walks through those doors." The musician smiled, tired but happy, and as long as they keep walking in, this place will never die. But even as they celebrated, challenges still loomed. The money would help for a while, but it wouldn't last forever. The musician's growing reputation brought attention too. Some good, some uncertain. A local producer who attended one of the open mic nights pulled him aside afterward. "You've got talent," the producer said firmly. "Raw talent. Ever thought about recording? About going bigger than this little shop?" The musician hesitated. His dream had always been to share his music with the world, but now he felt tied to the store, to the old man who had become almost like family. Could he leave when the store still needed him? That night he lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of his tiny room. For years he had wanted a chance like this, but now with it in front of him he wasn't sure. Success had always been about escaping poverty, proving himself, finding recognition. But here, in this dusty store, he had found something more valuable than fame: connection, belonging, purpose. The next day he walked into the store, guitar in hand. The old man greeted him with his usual slow smile. "You look like you've got something on your mind." The musician laughed softly. "Maybe I do, but whatever happens, I'm not walking away from this place. Not now." The old man nodded, his eyes glistening. "And I'm not walking away either." Together they looked around the shop, listening to the faint hum of strings being tuned, the chatter of people browsing, the echo of footsteps on wooden floors. The challenges weren't over. There would be more bills, more doubts, more nights of worry, but there would also be more music, More hope, more reasons to keep fighting. And in that moment, both of them knew. They weren't just saving a store. They were saving each other. The weeks after the fundraiser brought a wave of change to the little music store. The old man and the musician had no time to rest, yet for once they did not feel drained. Every day, new faces walked through the doors. Some were curious after hearing about the concert night. Others came because they wanted to be part of something real, something warm and different from the noise outside. Children tugged their parents' hands to show them the instruments they dreamed of playing. Teenagers sat on the floor strumming borrowed guitars while waiting for their lessons. Neighbors who had passed the store for years without ever stepping and now stopped to chat, often leaving with a second-hand record or a simple smile. The store became more than a business. It became a meeting place, a stage, a safe corner for those who felt unseen. The old man found himself working harder than he had in decades, yet he felt lighter. The burden of loneliness had been replaced by the comfort of belonging. Still, the reality of money lingered. The fundraiser had helped, but the bills kept coming. The musician and the old man often stayed late, sitting by the counter with cups of cheap coffee, going over what little they had left in the register. One night, the musician broke the silence. "I met a producer at the fundraiser. He thinks I could go further with my music, maybe even record an album." The old man looked up slowly, his hands tightening around the coffee cup. "That's good news, isn't it?" "It should be," the musician admitted. "It's everything I ever wanted, but I don't know. Leaving now feels wrong. This place needs both of us." The old man studied him carefully. "Listen, you don't owe me or this store your whole life. You've got talent. If someone's offering you a chance to shine, you can't just turn away. That would be a mistake you'd regret forever." The musician frowned. "And what about you? What happens here if I go chasing dreams?" "I'll manage," the old man replied, though his eyes gave away the doubt he carried. "I've managed before." For days after that talk, the musician carried the weight of the decision with him everywhere. When he played at open mic nights, people came up to him afterward, urging him to take the chance. When he sat in the store, teaching a child how to press their fingers against strings, he wondered if he could walk away from the joy of these small victories. The tug-of-war inside him only grew stronger when the producer came back. This time he placed a card on the counter and said firmly, "I can book you in a studio next month. You've got something people will want to hear. Don't waste this." The musician slipped the card into his pocket, but the thought of telling the old man made his chest ache. As the recording date crept closer, life in the store carried on. One evening, a storm rolled through the city, shaking the windows with heavy rain. Despite the weather, a group of kids huddled inside, refusing to miss their weekly lesson. Their laughter echoed between the shelves. The old man watched them quietly, his lips curling into a smile he didn't even realize he was wearing. Later, that night when the last child had been picked up and the rain softened, the musician finally spoke. "I think I'm going to do it, record the album." The old man's face stayed still for a moment, then softened. "I knew you would. You're meant for more than four walls and a cash register." The musician nodded but admitted, "I'm scared. What if I fail? What if I leave here and lose everything?" The old man leaned back, his voice steady. "Failing isn't the worst thing. Never trying is. This store may need you, but the world needs your music more. Don't let fear keep you small." The musician let those words sink in. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe the choice wasn't between the store and his dream. Maybe it was both. When the day of recording arrived, the musician packed his guitar and headed into the studio. It was nothing glamorous, just a small space with padded walls and dim lights, but to him it felt like standing on the edge of a new world. He played as if the old wooden floors of the shop were beneath his feet, as if the old man were in the corner nodding along. Song after song poured out of him. Songs of hardship, of nights spent on subway benches, of strangers who became family, of a store that refused to die. His voice cracked at times, his hands trembled, but the producer just smiled. "That's it. That's the sound people will remember." When the album was finished, it spread faster than either of them could have imagined. Local radio stations picked it up. People started sharing his songs online. Soon, strangers walked into the music store asking, Is this where that musician started? The one who sings about the little shop? The old man would smile each time and say proudly, "Yes, this is the place." The attention brought more customers, more life, more hope. The store no longer felt like it was fighting to survive. It was alive, strong, and known. And through it all, the musician never stopped coming back. Even as invitations rolled in for bigger shows, he always returned to play in the store, to sit with the children who had learned their first notes there, to drink coffee with the old man at the counter. One evening after a particularly busy day, the old man locked the door and leaned against it, his chest heavy with emotion. "I never thought I'd see this place alive again. I was ready to let it all go. But then you walked in with nothing but a guitar and a stubborn smile, and everything changed." The musician grinned. "You gave me a place when I had none. You gave me a stage when the world wouldn't listen. If anyone saved this place, it was you." The old man shook his head. "No, we saved each other." The two sat in silence, for a while, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, each lost in their own thoughts. In time, the store became more than just a business or even a community hub. It became a symbol of what could happen when people chose to believe in one another. For the musician, it was the proof that dreams could grow in the most unlikely places. For the old man, it was the reminder that even in the final chapters of life there was room for new beginnings. And so the music never stopped.